Okay, the second in the registration videos, we're actually going to create the new user account. Okay, there are a couple of issues. The login name needs to be unique, and we'll deal with that in a separate video. Okay, that'll be the third video, just making sure that the login, so at the minute the login names will be non-unique. Okay, so here's our registration page with our nice validation that checks everything's been entered and that we've got a password that's been confirmed properly. Right, double clicking the register details button takes us to the click code we've got. Now, the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new user ID. So we're assuming we've got through validation. We want to create a new user ID. So create some storage for it. Now, I don't have any code that does this, but I'm going to stick it in my data because that's where all my helper code goes. So I'm going to create some code in there that is going to create a way of getting a new user ID that's unique, so that the next biggest one. And I'm going to call it next user ID. It doesn't exist, but that's what I'm going to call it. Okay, so where the red squiggle is, I'm now going to right click on that and I'm going to say generate, and what I want is a property. Okay, so I'm going to get this to generate a property for me. See, stop squiggling, so I'm going to right click on it and we're going to create this bit of code first. Okay, so it's got that get and set thing. Now this one, all it's ever going to do is get, so we can delete the set part. Okay, I'm going to put an XML comment in before I do anything, so I'm going to say get a unique user ID, and I'm going to just say how it works, which is the largest one plus 1. That's what we're going to do. Okay. Right, so at the minute it's giving us a generic get, so we're just going to put some braces in after the get. See what I did? Deleted the semicolon and did that. And it's moaning there because we're not returning a value and because we haven't finished writing it yet. Okay. In order to do this, what we need to do is ask the database what the biggest user ID is, and then we're going to add 1 to it. That's all we're going to do. So we're going to go string SQL equals, and this is a standard select statement, so top 1 user ID. Remember, you might have different names for yours. Mine's called user ID. Look at my server explorer. Okay, doing it all on separate lines. Top 1 just means get me only 1. Okay, on the next line, let's tab that over, I'm going to say from the name of my user table, so that's TBL user. Move on to another line. So all I'm doing is I'm separating my text into separate blocks. Now, I don't need to say where because I'm looking at all the data, but I do need an order. So I'm going to say order by user ID descending. Okay, so I'm saying show me the biggest one first, but only show me the top one. So I should only get the biggest user name, in theory. Okay, we now need to create storage because we're going to get our helper code to fill up a data view. So we're going to use our execute and fill, and you'll be glad you created these by the time you finish your website. So we're going to run that SQL, but we've got no parameters this time, so we're going to say null, no parameters. Okay, so that executes that query and gets hopefully a user ID, but we might not have any users. So what we need to do is we need to handle that. So we need to check. We don't assume we've got data. We need to check. So as long as we've got data, what we can do is return, and it's an integer. Remember when we did it on the login, we did the same thing. We cast to the type of data is user ID is the field we want, and we're going to add 1 to that. So that's what number we're going to return. So that gives us the largest plus 1, which is what I wrote in my little summary block. If we didn't get any data because there's no user accounts, we're going to return what the first one should be, which is 1, and that's it. Okay, so a simple little helper query that will get us the
user ID. Okay, if we go back to our registration code, we've now got that. So that's now happy and working. Right, let's create our insert query, because we're going to insert data into our database. So this is the format of an insert query. So we say insert into what table? Table user. What data? Now we're going to add the user ID, and you've got to get these names right. The order that you put them matters when you do the parameters. So for name, what we got? F login name, F password, F status. Let's just double check. Missed any? Leave a space at the end and a plus. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fields. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fields. Okay. Now, for sanity's sake, I'm going to put these in the right order that I've got them listed. So I've got user ID first, then login name, then password, then status and phone. So it matches the order that they're in the table. Okay. Anything I can do to try and minimize. I'm just going to squeeze that over. I shouldn't need the Server Explorer now. So I'm just going to hide that. Okay, so I can see my text better. Alright, so that's the first line. Then we've got to select the data that's going to be stored. Now, because we're using parameters, this is easy. We just go 1 parameter, 2 parameters, 3 parameters, 4 parameters, 5 parameters. That's it. That's the query. But we've got to add the parameters. Okay, so we're going to create a parameter collection. Just like we did. So PC equals new parameter collection. And then we're going to add the parameters to it. So pc.add new parameter. Right. So the name of them, I've just used question mark from all. Right. So the first one is the user ID. Got to do them in the same order. So now I'm going to put type code dot. This is a number. So numbers by default are 32-bit integers. So that's what int32 is. Where's it coming from? Well, it is tx. Oh no, it's not coming from anywhere. It's coming from new user ID. So it's coming from that variable. Now because all these parameters have to be passed with a type and then as text, we need to say for numbers toString. Which makes it look a bit horrendous on the end. Got loads of closing parentheses. But we've told it it's a number, but our format is already a number. So we have to convert it to text, to a string. It expects all the parameters to be passed as strings, but then you tell it the data type. So just try and remember that. And then we've got a closing parentheses for the toString method, for the parameter method, and the add method. Okay, so there's 3 at the end there. Right, let's add the other ones in. So new parameter, it was called that. That's why I use the question mark, and I don't have to keep worrying about all that. So type code. Now the other ones, the username, the login name, and everything, they're all strings, so I don't need to worry too much about that one. Okay, so that's going to be string, and that's going to come from this is login name, so that's going to be tx login name dot text. Okay, right, because the other ones are all, so the login name, password, status, and forename, they're all text. I'm going to copy and paste, but I've got to be careful that I change the names. So the next parameter was the password, so that's tx. Hang on, it's going to get narky with me now. Tx password.text. The status. Now, the status is just going to be user, because that's what I'm using. If I look at my database table, my status is either admin or user in lowercase. So a normal user, which is what we're doing the registration for, will be user. Alright? So I'm physically putting that, so no one can log in and become an admin, which is what I don't want to happen. So I'm physically setting that. For any fixed values, that's what you can always do. And then the last one is the forename or client name. So that was tx visible name dot text. Okay, so I've put them in the same order that they're in the insert statement. Okay. Right. Next thing, execute it. So I can just say data dot execute insert. So this is an insert, and the command is the SQL dot, and the parameters are the PC. So it should just execute it, and that's it. But what would be nice is to log them in. Okay, we've got all the data. If we go back quickly to our login stuff, we want user ID, name, and access level. So I'm just going to copy those. Well, no, I'm not going to copy. I'm going to do it again. User ID, name, and access level. I've got all that information already, so I can actually just put all that information in. So I can say storage.user ID equals new user ID. Storage dot name equals tx visible name dot text, and storage. So what I'm going to do is automatically log the user in. This access level equals user. Okay, and then all I've got to do is make sure we go back to the home page, which is default.aspx. So let's just put an XML comment at the top of this. So create new user account and auto login, because that's what it's doing. So all we did is we get the new user ID, which used a nice little helper. If I just right click and say go to definition, nice little helper which got us the biggest user number, and then added one to it. Then create our insert, which just says what table, what fields, load of parameters. Then we add the parameters from the text boxes, with the user one being fixed. Execute it, which just inserts it. Set up the long-term storage, the persistent storage, and then redirect to the home page. Bearing in mind that the user accounts, the login names, we're not checking the validation on those yet, and that will be the next video. So let's just run it and check it works. So I'm going to come up with, I want Dave as my login name, screen name Dave, password Dave, confirm my password as Dave. Let's have my screen name as new user Davey instead. Then I'll be able to see it. So when I register, hopefully, there it goes, welcome back, new user Davey. Maybe welcome back's not brilliant. Okay, let's log out. Let's log him in. I've forgotten what he was called, so let's go back to code view, and if I execute SQL, it should put it in there. Dave, oh, and the password was Dave. So all it is, I went back and I'm using the facility. So it's Dave, Dave. Log in, works. And that's it. Next video is going to show you how to make sure we get unique user login names.